Vacations turned into nightmares, celebrations ended in sorrow, and what should have been the time of their lives became their final moments. Join us as we discover 5 haunting stories of people who set out for adventure, seeking joy, escape, and unforgettable moments, but were met with unthinkable tragedy. Karen Aim had embarked on what should have been an exciting chapter of her life, an extended working holiday in New Zealand. But in the early hours of January 17, 2008, she became the victim of a senseless act, one that would shock both New Zealand and her homeland of Scotland. At 26 years old, Karen was a vibrant and adventurous woman from Orkney, Scotland. She had first visited New Zealand in 2006. Encouraged by her experience, she decided to return on a working visa. She quickly found work in Taupo. Karen spent the evening of January 16, 2008 out with friends, socializing and dancing in Taupo's nightlife scene. She had driven into town but decided to leave her car behind, choosing instead to walk home. Her last known movements were captured on CCTV, showing her visiting a petrol station shortly after 2 a.m., just minutes after leaving the Element Bar. She then began the 20-minute walk back to the house she shared with friends, unaware that she was heading toward unimaginable horror. At around 2:14 a.m. on January 17, 2008, police received a report from a security guard at a local college after an alarm was triggered. Someone had been smashing reinforced windows with a heavy object. By the time authorities arrived, they found Karen lying on a footpath, just 100 yards from her home. She was barely conscious, surrounded by a pool of blood. Her wallet was on her stomach and her skirt had been lifted. Her injuries were catastrophic. She had suffered massive skull fractures from at least 3 brutal blows to her head, inflicted with a baseball bat. Despite being rushed to the hospital, she succumbed to her injuries shortly after. It was a senseless attack. Investigators reviewed security footage from the area. One crucial piece of evidence emerged: a grainy video of a young man riding a bicycle near the college just after 2 a.m. The footage led police to 14-year-old Yachi Broughton, a teenager who lived with his grandparents. His home was placed under surveillance, and soon after, officers spotted him riding a similar bicycle. A search warrant was issued, and what they found inside the house was chilling. The baseball bat, still covered in blood and embedded with glass shards, was recovered, along with Karen's stolen camera and remnants of her handbag, which had been burned in an incinerator. Broughton was arrested and charged with murder, aggravated robbery, and intentional damage. He initially attempted to shift blame, claiming that an acquaintance named Brian was responsible for the attack. However, there was no evidence to support this claim. The reality was much different. Just days before he killed Karen, the 14-year-old had attacked another woman, beating her so severely with a rock that she required 30 staples in her head. Karen's death devastated her family. Her father, Brian Aim, described her as a ray of sunshine who brought warmth wherever she went. Her aunt recalled how her presence could transform an entire household, filling it with joy. The thought of her suffering such a brutal death was unbearable. Karen's body was returned to Scotland, where a funeral was held in her hometown. In court, Broughton pleaded guilty, but his explanations for his actions were deeply unsettling. He claimed that at the time, he believed violence against women was normal, and later described his attack as an accident. He also cited a lack of boundaries in his upbringing and the influence of substances and alcohol. His lack of genuine remorse and repeated lies during parole hearings raised concerns about his rehabilitation. Since becoming eligible for parole in 2020, he has been denied release multiple times. His behavior in prison, including being caught with contraband and showing inconsistencies in his statements, only reinforced doubts about his ability to reintegrate into society. Karen's family, particularly her father, strongly opposed any early release for Broughton. Brian Aim expressed fears for public safety. He pointed out that while Broughton still had his entire life ahead of him, Karen had been robbed of hers in the most horrific way. Her death left a permanent void, one that no measure of justice could ever truly fill. To honor her memory, Karen's family placed a commemorative bench in Orkney, with a duplicate installed in Taupo. In April 2018, 64-year-old Rosalind Joyfew and 62-year-old Normand LaRose embarked on what was meant to be a dream vacation alongside their family. The couple had traveled from Phoenix, Arizona to Ireland. They had no way of knowing that their excursion would end in tragedy, casting a dark shadow over the serene Gap of Dunloe and leaving their loved ones devastated. Joy, who was known for her warmth and kindness, was a devoted mother and grandmother who loved to explore the world. Her partner Normand, originally from Quebec, Canada, was a man full of life and humor, always seeking adventure. They had joined Rosalind's daughter, Tanya Tier, her son-in-law, and their 2 grandchildren for a special trip through Ireland. On the morning of April 9, 2018, the family set out for what should have been an unforgettable day of sightseeing. They had traveled from Killarney to Ross Castle before boarding a boat that carried them past Muckross Lake and into Killarney National Park. Their route led them to Lord Brandon's cottage, a historic 19th century hunting lodge nestled deep in the landscape. From there, they boarded traditional horse-drawn carriages known as jaunting cars to make their way through the famous Gap of Dunloe, an 11-kilometer winding road surrounded by rugged cliffs and breathtaking scenery. Rosalind and Norman rode in the first carriage, while the rest of the family followed in 2 others. The ponies, familiar with the route, made their way down the steep road, navigating sharp bends and narrow passes. But as they approached a particularly treacherous stretch near the Turnpike Rock, something went terribly wrong. Without warning, the pony pulling Rosalind and Norman's carriage bolted. Eyewitnesses later speculated that it may have sensed it was nearing home and rushed in anticipation, but others believed something unexpected startled it. Whatever the cause, the animal surged forward uncontrollably, sending the lightweight trap careening down the steep descent. The driver, a young man in his 20s, fought desperately to regain control, but there was nothing he could do. The momentum was too great. The carriage bounced violently along the uneven road, its passengers unable to steady themselves. Just before reaching an old stone bridge known as the Wishing Bridge, the carriage hit a sharp curve. The impact caused the trap to flip, hurling Rosalind and Norman from their seats. The couple was thrown nearly 30 feet over the side of the bridge, their bodies landing on the jagged rocks below and into a stream. The young driver miraculously escaped serious injury, but he was left shaken. Behind them, Tanya and her family didn't directly witness the incident, but when they came upon the scene, they were gripped by absolute horror. Bystanders rushed to help, including British tourist Stuart Ainsley, who climbed down to move the wreckage off the victims. He later recalled the terrible sight. Rosalind and Norman had suffered fatal head injuries on impact. There was nothing anyone could do. It was a painstaking effort to retrieve the bodies from the ravine, as the area was steep and rocky. The remains were transported to University Hospital Kerry for post-mortem examinations, confirming the cause of death as blunt force trauma. The tragedy shocked the community of Killarney. The Gap of Dunloe is a beloved tourist destination, known for its beauty rather than danger. Questions quickly arose about the safety of the jaunting cars. While fatal accidents were rare, there had been previous incidents involving tourists being thrown from carts. Just the year before, 3 visitors had narrowly escaped with minor injuries after a similar accident. Investigations into the crash followed, with authorities examining whether the horse and carriage met safety standards. There were claims that the traps lacked proper braking systems or security measures to prevent such incidents. The driver, deeply traumatized, was questioned but ultimately not held responsible for the accident. The horse had to be put down due to injuries sustained in the crash. Tanya Tier, who had planned the trip with her mother, was left to deal with the heartbreaking loss. In the years that followed, she and other family members pursued legal action, suing the horse and trap driver and Kerry County Council for negligence. While claims against the county were later dismissed, settlements were reached in several lawsuits, with substantial sums awarded to the victims' families. Local officials and tourism representatives expressed their sorrow, acknowledging that the tragedy had deeply affected the community. Despite the legal battles and lingering questions, the pain of Rosalind and Norman's passing remains. On August 15, 2022, Richard Dujardin, a 77-year-old retired journalist from Providence, Rhode Island, was visiting Milwaukee, Wisconsin with his wife of 54 years, Rosemary. They had arrived the previous Friday and were staying in a downtown hotel, enjoying their time in the city before their scheduled flight home later that day. That afternoon, they set out on a short walk to attend Mass at St. Mary's Catholic Church. Richard was a man of faith and unshakable curiosity. He had spent nearly 5 decades covering religion for the Providence Journal, earning a reputation for his thoughtful and fair reporting on diverse faiths and beliefs. His career had taken him across the globe, allowing him to interview figures such as Billy Graham and the Dalai Lama. Even after retirement, he remained devoted to his craft, continuing to write and engage with the world. But as the couple strolled through the city taking in the sights, they had no idea that their peaceful day was about to turn into a nightmare. A short while into their walk, they reached the Kilbourne Avenue Bridge, a drawbridge spanning the Milwaukee River. As they made their way across, Rosemary moved ahead while Richard, a slow walker, followed behind, absorbed in his iPad. Unbeknownst to Richard, the bridge was about to open. Milwaukee's Department of Public Works operates several remotely controlled drawbridges across the city, including Kilbourne Avenue Bridge. The bridge operator, stationed miles away, monitored the span through 2 camera feeds. At the designated time, the traffic barriers were lowered, and warning lights flashed as bells rang, signaling pedestrians and vehicles to stop. However, Richard, hard of hearing, wearing glasses and focused on his device, neither saw nor heard the warnings. As Rosemary reached the other side, the bridge beneath Richard's feet began to rise. He realized the danger too late. The pavement tilted sharply as the 2 sections lifted toward a 90-degree angle. Struggling to keep his footing, Richard lunged for the side railing and clung on, his hands gripping the metal bar as the bridge continued to ascend. Witnesses watched in horror as he dangled above the river, his body suspended in midair. He fought for his life, fought to hold on, his grip tightening against the pull of gravity. But after 1 to 2 agonizing minutes, his strength gave out. He lost his grasp and plummeted roughly 70 feet onto the concrete below. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but the impact had been catastrophic. Richard had suffered severe head trauma, and despite efforts to revive him, he was pronounced dead at the scene. His wife, still on the other side of the bridge, could only watch helplessly as the tragedy unfolded. In the aftermath of Richard's death, questions arose about the safety of remotely operated drawbridges. The city of Milwaukee defended its system, noting that remote bridge operations were standard practice and that safety protocols had been followed. The operator on duty had been in his 4th year of service, with hundreds of successful bridge openings to his name. According to the medical examiner's report, Richard was wearing dark-colored clothing at the time of the accident, while the railing of the bridge is dark green. This suggests it's possible the bridge operator couldn't see Richard on the cameras and as such began opening the bridge. However, the fact remained that a man had died, and his family was left grappling with unimaginable grief. Rosemary and their 6 children mourned the loss of a man who had dedicated his life to storytelling, faith, and family. The Providence Journal, where Richard had spent the majority of his career, honored his legacy, remembering him as a dedicated journalist and a kind, humble man who approached his work with a sense of purpose and integrity. Colleagues recalled his quiet demeanor, his ever-present pipe in the days when smoking in newsrooms was common, and his deep commitment to truth and understanding. It was July 25, 2022, and tourist Jack Fenton had just disembarked a Bell 407 helicopter at a private airfield near Athens, Greece. Having spent time with his friends on the idyllic island of Mykonos, he was scheduled to return home to the United Kingdom later that evening. But Jack never got to see his loved ones again. Jack was a 22-year-old British man, described by those who knew him as kind, thoughtful, and devoted to his friends and family. A former student of Sutton Valence School in Kent, he later attended Oxford Brookes University, where he was known for his love of football and leadership as a vice-captain of his team. Professionally, he had begun a promising career as a junior executive in a social media firm. Jack had been on holiday in Greece with 3 close friends, soaking in the sun before their return journey. July 25, 2022 was his last day in Greece. Jack and his friends boarded a private helicopter to Athens, intending to catch a connecting flight back to the UK. Upon landing at Lolo Airfield near Sparta, they disembarked the aircraft. However, in a matter of seconds, the trip took a catastrophic turn. For reasons still unknown, Jack walked towards the rear of the helicopter, where the tail rotor was still engaged. The lethal blades, spinning at up to 500 revolutions per second, were nearly invisible in the darkness of the evening. In an instant, Jack was struck, suffering fatal head injuries. Emergency services arrived swiftly, but it was too late. He had been killed instantly. The circumstances surrounding the accident have been heavily scrutinized. Greece's Committee for Aviation Accidents claimed that Jack ignored safety protocols, alleging he had returned to the aircraft at a fast pace while holding his phone to his ear, despite frantic shouts from ground staff to stop. However, Jack's friends, including fellow passenger Jack Stanton-Gleaves, disputed this account. They asserted that no clear safety instructions had been given upon exiting the aircraft, and no one was escorted to the private lounge as authorities claimed. Instead, they insisted that passengers disembarked independently, with no warnings about the still active rotor blades. Jack's sister, Daisy Fenton, also disdained the suggestion that her brother recklessly ignored safety precautions. She described him as responsible and questioned why passengers were allowed to leave the helicopter while its engine was still running. "Jack is not a 10-year-old, she stated. If someone shouted at him to stop, he wouldn't keep going. Authorities launched a formal investigation into the incident, with Greek police detaining the helicopter pilot and 2 ground technicians for questioning. They were later released but still faced potential charges of negligent homicide. Investigators sought to determine whether the necessary safety measures were in place and if Jack had been properly instructed about the dangers before disembarking. CCTV footage from the landing field was reviewed in hopes of shedding light on his final moments. The Fenton family, devastated by their loss, expressed frustration over the lack of direct communication from Greek authorities. Jack's father, Miguel Fenton, criticized the handling of the case, emphasizing that the family had not been given access to the autopsy report or official updates. He described his son's death as a brutal way to die and demanded the truth be uncovered. In the UK, tributes poured in for Jack. Friends and former classmates remembered him as a warm and generous young man, while Oxford Brookes University praised his dedication to his football team and ongoing support for the club as an alumnus. His former headmaster at Sutton Valence School expressed deep sorrow, noting how beloved Jack was within the school community. The tragic accident left many questions unanswered, with conflicting accounts fueling an ongoing debate about responsibility. While Greek aviation officials stood by their claim that Jack disregarded safety instructions, his grieving family and friends insisted that no clear guidance had been given. A family vacation meant to be filled with laughter and cherished memories turned into an unimaginable tragedy on October 7th, when Jamie Lambrose, a 48-year-old man from Long Island, New York, sacrificed himself to save a mother and her 10-year-old son. Jamie, known for his warm heart and unwavering generosity, had been on a cruise with 11 family members when the tragedy unfolded. The weather was inviting that afternoon at Horseshoe Bay Beach. But beyond the quiet shoreline, famous for its pink sands and crystal-clear waters, strong currents and turbulent waves waited for the right time to strike. Multiple signs warned visitors of the rough conditions caused by hurricane season, but few could have predicted how quickly the situation would escalate. At some point, a mother and her young son found themselves struggling against the relentless pull of the ocean. They were caught in a powerful current, unable to make their way back to shore. Jamie, despite not being a strong swimmer, did not hesitate. He rushed into the water, determined to help them, but the battle against the current was unforgiving. Jamie fought to keep the mother and child afloat. Eventually, the mother and son made it back to shore. But in his heroic efforts, Jamie himself was left struggling to face the waters. A woman on the beach attempted to pull him back to safety, but by the time help arrived, it was too late. Emergency responders rushed to the scene, performing life-saving measures before transporting him to King Edward VII Memorial Hospital, where he was pronounced dead. The devastating news shattered his family. His mother, Phyllis Gaspari, recounted the heart-wrenching moment when she learned what had happened. Her son, a man who had always put others before himself, had given his life to save 2 strangers. Overwhelmed by grief, Joey Pappas, Jamie's brother, said that it was the one time he and Jamie had split up during their trip, a decision that would haunt him forever. Jamie's loved ones took to a GoFundMe page to remember him, writing that he was so much more than a son, brother, uncle, cousin, godfather, and friend. He was the life of every party, someone whose laughter filled any room and whose heart was as big as his spirit. His loss was felt deeply, not just by those who knew him personally, but by all who heard of his heroism. His loved ones described him as someone whose presence could brighten any room, a man whose laughter was infectious and whose kindness knew no bounds. To his younger brother, Joey Pappas, Jamie was more than just family. He was a lifelong hero, someone who had always been there to protect and support those around him. As they mourned, Jamie's family also sought to turn their grief into action. They began speaking out about the dangers of Horseshoe Bay Beach, a popular tourist destination that, despite its beauty, posed significant risks. They emphasized the lack of emergency response measures, calling for changes to ensure no other family would have to endure such a tragedy. Jamie's mother warned that there were no rescue skis or immediate emergency teams available when he needed them most. His brother voiced his frustration, stating that tourists should be made fully aware of the dangers before stepping into the water. Jamie Lambrose's final act was one of selflessness and bravery, a testament to the kind of man he was.